Good morning and welcome to the first full day of Land of Hope and Dreams, a celebration of Dave Marsh's work and vision. We had a great conversation last night with John Landau, and I'm looking forward to three great conversations today. We've got three panels coming up today. This one on CREEM and the origins of rock writing, one on listening, and one on Detroit and beyond. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I am one of the organizers of this terrific event. And overall, we've got 16 panels in total over the next 3 weekends. So I hope you can join us for as many of those as possible. And as we celebrate Dave Marsh, of course, music journalism is at the center of that story, but we wanted to make sure that Land of Hope and Dreams also holds true to Dave's expansive and never-ending quest to build bridges between the worlds of music, politics, healthcare, and social justice. And so our speakers come from everywhere, but all of them share a commitment to those values as well and that vision. Before we move on to our panel, I do want to thank once again our steering committee who have been amazing in getting this thing together. Danny Alexander, Chris Buhalis, Charles Hughes, Susan Martinez, Lauren Anke, Alexander Shashko, Craig Werner, and Daniel Wolf. And David Cantwell has also been there behind the scenes right from the beginning. And I'd also like to thank Karen Rose for doing all of our social media and hopefully getting the message out to some of you who are watching today. I'd also like to thank our partners, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the University of Wisconsin-Madison Afro-American Studies Department. They've both helped to promote this event, and the Rock Hall will also be streaming the Spotlight conversation between Dave Marsh and Daniel Wolf on their YouTube channel on May 14th. And all of these conversations are also being simulcast on the Land of Hope and Dreams YouTube channel, where they will also be archived. Finally, I wanted to mention the Kristen and Carr Fund, which David and his wife Barbara set up a couple of decades ago to raise money for sarcoma research and to fund fellows working in the sarcoma field. It's a tremendous cause. We are presenting this all to you for free, but if you're in the mood to pony up a few bucks and want to give it to a good cause, I know Dave and Barbara and the Kristen Ann Carr Fund would certainly appreciate any charity, any contributions. And there's a link to that on the Land of Hope and Dreams website. Now, on to the conversations. Before we dive into today's panel, we've got a message from Gavin Martin, who is the former music critic for the Daily Mirror and has written in everything from Mojo to Uncut and all sorts of other, mostly UK-based publications. He's got a long relationship with Dave Marsh, and we'd like to share a video message from him now before we move into the panel discussion.
Hey Dave, how you doing? Isn't this great? A festival dedicated to your work and the community that it's played to and the ideas it's inspired. Not before time either, so eat your heart out. Woodstock, Watt, Stack, Glastonbury, Ultimate, and the Village Green Preservation Society. It's been a genuine honour and a privilege to have a small part in the ongoing story of Marshland, I guess you might say. Your writing and your person has been the living embodiment of the ripple theory, from reading in Stranded to getting rock and rap every month back in the 80s, 90s, and from your appearances at various forums to the personalised epistles that you sent out for your late daughter. It's an object lesson in how words and thoughts and feelings shaped into coherent and impassioned arguments, often both together, can set off a whole chain reaction of investigation and consequences. So I treasure the times that we've spent together, person to person, word to word, and you're writing on so many people like The Who, Bruce, Aretha, Van has excited and energized me, and often just when I needed it most. Like on April Fool's Day, 1992, I was in Paris to interview James Brown, and waited all day to talk to James. And when it started off, didn't start off too well. James threatened to walk, and it was by digging into the points that you had made in your epilogue that we found favour, set the house on fire, and by the end of the interview, he was able to offer me up this glowing testimonial, approving greatly of the young man who had written the epilogue. Anyway, that's it from Soul Brother #1 there, and I kind of the evenings and days that we've spent together amongst some of the most instructive, and not even Don Henley. Oh, what am I saying? I love Don or Bono asking us what we were up to, telling us what we should be up to could ruin it. So keep on keeping on, Dave, and just stay away from the brine acid at Dave Fest, and blessings be upon you, brother.
Hi, my name is Danny Alexander, and I want to welcome you all to the first panel, day 2 of Land of Hope and Dreams. I have a few words to say about this panel first before we start. I was a longtime editor of Dave Marsh's, associate editor of Dave Marsh's Rock and Rap Confidential, if you don't know. And so I've been at the same thing for a long time. Writers love words and spend a lot of time alone writing. With music journalism, this can sometimes lead to lyrics-heavy interpretations of music and a perspective that springs from some degree of isolation. Those things have value. But one way Dave Marsh's arguments have always stood out is in their emphasis on the music itself and the various communities that form around the music. Always first and foremost, an idea of the fan as a part of a community, and the fan's issues as the musician's issues as well. And vice versa, other intersecting communities are those formed by the musicians themselves, starting with bands, and the many more that make sure the music gets heard and performed widely, and that its ideas actually have opportunities to engage with the audience. That's what Rock and Rap Confidential was always about. And that's why Marsh's work focuses on not only the perils of rock criticism, but those faced by DJs and sound engineers and communities who fight for human rights, including artist pay. And that's why it's particularly fitting that we kick off the first full day of Land of Hope and Dreams with a talk with his first community as a music journalist in Detroit, CREEM, America's self-proclaimed only rock and roll magazine, and arguably the place that most exemplifies my sense of what rock writing is really all about, the idea of a genre itself that exists as a response to rock's call. To moderate this panel, we are fortunate to have Brad Talinsky, the longtime editor-in-chief of The Great Guitar World, which puts first the community of musicians forged by the music. Talinsky is also the author of Light and Shade, Conversations with Jimmy Page, and Play It Loud, an epic history of the style, sound, and revolution of the electric guitar, which was the basis for a 2019 guitar-focused exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Most recently, he edited the 50th anniversary commemorative issue of CREEM magazine, and his Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, will be coming out in October 2021. So here's a virtual round of applause for Mr. Brad Talinsky and greats Jan Yukowski, Susan Whitehall, and Chuck Eddy. Thank you very much. Take away, Brad.
Well, thank you so much, Danny. Really appreciate that introduction. And again, we are CREEM and the Origins of Rock Writing. And with us today are 3 former editors and writers for CREEM, the landmark Detroit-based rock and roll magazine that served as sort of the irreverent counterbalance to Rolling Stone in the 70s and 80s. CREEM is particularly relevant to this conference, as it was the place where Dave Marsh first made his name as a writer and editor. On our panel is the brilliant rock journalist Jan Yukowski, who also got her start as a CREEM writer and worked closely with Dave. She later went on to become the magazine's senior editor throughout much of the 70s. Jan is currently writing for outlets like Uncut Magazine and is working on her much anticipated autobiography. Hey, Jan, how's it going?
Wow, like pull those beans right out of the can.
Also with us is Sue Whitehall, who wrote for CREEM from 1975 to 1983 and rose to the ranks of editor-in-chief. She went on to become a feature and entertainment writer for the Detroit News, and is the author of Fever, a brilliant book on the tumultuous life of 60s R&B artist Little Willie John. Hey, Sue, how are you doing?
Good.
And lastly, we have Chuck Eddy, who wrote for CREEM in the 80s and served as a music editor for the Village Voice for several years, and has authored four spectacularly entertaining books, including Terminated for Reasons of Taste and Other Ways to Hear Essential and Inessential Music, and the wonderful Stairway to Hell, the 500 Best Heavy Metal Albums in the Universe. Hey, everybody. Since this is the origins of rock writing, let's travel back to your beginnings and ask what motivated you guys to write about music. Jan?
Well, since I'm the oldest,
Barely.
and yeah, barely. I think what it was in something that Eric said about a tribe. It's like we all. The whole thing with CREEM was about community, and for me, it was I was looking for others that loved music as much as I did, because there was just this metaphysical link between what I heard and wanting to tell other people about it. And not only did I get to tell other people about it who were part of CREEM, but I got to tell readers, I could tell fans. I'd worked at a place called the Grandie Ballroom, and experiencing it and watching shows just wasn't enough. It's like you wanted to tell people. It's like playing telephone. It's like there was this great need to express about it. And then and the next step really was is you felt a link with the people who were reading, and also an amazing link with the people around you, because at that time when CREEM started in 1969, there weren't a lot of us. I mean, there was that charming little distinction between straights and heads, and the whole thing is coming into CREEM with all these people that were like me was like, I wasn't alone out there. I mean, Eric also talked about the isolation of rock journalists, or actually Danny, and that's profound. It's like, you're alone in a vacuum and you wonder if you're right. I mean, at CREEM, if you were wrong, there was always someone to tell you. It's like
If you're from Detroit, there's always somebody to tell you.
Right? It's like, yeah, nothing passes. So I think that's mine. I was just looking for like-minded people. It could have been in sports. I mean, I was like a crazy Detroit Tigers fan, but it just happened to be music, which, I like more. And that was like, whatever it was, like God speaking, to be really corny, but there was just some link of the other comes through music. And Lester has this famous quote about prophecy, about like he had seen something in a flashbulb moment and he had been spending the rest of his life looking for it. And I think for me, I actually thought that artists knew something, heard something, and they were passing it on through their lyrics. And I still believe that. So that's mine.
Sue?
Yeah, I had seen, I think my first issue of CREEM, it was Dave's story on Seeger. The Seeger had played my high school, Birmingham Seaholm, and one of the burnouts gave me a copy, and I'm looking at it, whoa, okay. Am I asking I get dirty from this? But I'm reading it, and I had fun. But by the time I found CREEM as a place to work, I was English major, no job. I was hanging out in the bookstore underneath CREEM. I didn't know CREEM was upstairs. The guy at the desk, Gene, the owner, was like, yeah, those assholes live upstairs. They work upstairs, they live there, and they owe me money. And I'm like, whoa, this magazine is here in my hometown. So I wrote a letter to the editor. I had lunch with the then editor, Wayne. And then he invited me to come to the office. There was Jan, there was Lester. And it was like my dream place, because it was creative writing, which I'd never thought I'd find in Detroit. I thought you had to go to New York for this. This was the most creative place to be, in Detroit. And you could write about anything. It wasn't just music writing, which did interest me. I'd gotten to see the Beatles when I was 12. Jan was at that show too. But anyway, it was, and everything I'd feared about CREEM, like I heard, Lester's reputation being what it was, couldn't have been friendlier. Jan helped me because as a woman, she was, I don't know, welcoming another woman in, and she would tell me that she would give me assignments. The guys were going to just hang out, which was true. So that got my foot in the door. And from there on, I couldn't believe my luck, just being there and being able to write in that sort of atmosphere. And yeah, we would tell each other we were wrong all the time, but there was also a lot of support from all the other editors. And it was a small place. We only had about 4 editors at a time. So we would be yelling at each other to shut up and turn the music down or up. And we got to know each other pretty well.
So Chuck, what motivated you to start writing about music?
I was a writer before I was a music critic, and I was a music critic before I was a CREEM critic. I actually came into the picture later than Sue or Jan did. I wrote for CREEM in the late 80s, the DiMartino, Kordash, Holdship era. But like I said, I grew up in suburban Detroit, and I wrote about zoning commissions and sewage boards and a lot of high school sports for a little alternative weekly newspaper called the Spinal Column, which covered Walled Lake, Waterford, West Bloomfield. I don't know if it quite went to Birmingham, but northern Oakland County. So I wrote about everything else. When I started college at University of Detroit in '79, and I had graduated high school in West Bloomfield owning only like 8 albums. Music was not one of my interests. But arrogantly enough, since I wrote about everything else, once I started getting interested in music, I was buying Elvis Costello albums and wearing a skinny tie and whatever. I figured, oh wow, I can write about music too, even though I owned probably fewer albums than most of the people I went to school with. And had gone to far fewer concerts. So I started writing there after seeing a Village Voice Paz and Jop poll when I was at the Varsity News at University of Detroit. And the Paz and Jop poll, which I ended up running for 7 years at the turn of the millennium, it polls hundreds of music critics from around the country on their favorite albums and eventually singles of the year. And I just saw this list, and I'm a math guy. There were all these artists who I had no idea who they were. I mean, I didn't know who David Johansen was. I didn't know who Tom Verlaine was, or what a Wire was, or what a Funkadelic was. And I was fascinated. It was like a puzzle I wanted to put together. So I started writing for The Voice. I actually wrote Robert Christgau. I somehow weaseled my way into voting in this poll. And my 3rd year, at which time I was a 2nd lieutenant in the Army in Germany, I attached an 11-page letter to my ballot. And it just kind of tearing apart the state of music and the state of music criticism and whatever else I could just like spew out of me. Robert Christgau asked me to start writing for The Voice. By the time I was out of the Army, I was being asked to write by Rolling Stone and eventually CREEM. But the thing about CREEM was, I think my voice, I just found it like a kindred spirit. Is that the right word? With the CREEM, people wrote about music. They took it seriously, but they didn't take their taking it seriously. And it just seemed like the right way to do it. There was a life there. And I mean, the fact that it was by then based in Birmingham, which was like maybe a half hour from where I'd grown up, and was so focused on, the whole Detroit thing, was almost like a bonus for me. And in those years I wrote for CREEM, I probably felt more a part of, you could talk about community, more part of a team than at any other time, even probably more than when I was later working at The Voice or whatever. I felt like I fit in there. And I don't know whether that answers your question or not, but that's pretty much what I have for you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, CREEM, being reading it, it sort of opened up this idea. Like I wanted to be a writer, but somehow the idea of being like Norman Mailer, Kurt Vonnegut or something, that just was like too far out there. But the idea of writing a record review or writing music for a music magazine seemed, somewhat reasonable. So that's why I think I gravitated towards initially writing about music, just because it seemed like, okay, I could probably get started there. I mean, did any of you have that experience like that, just like, oh my God, well, that this is just a plausible thing for me to do?
Yeah. Well, in the 70s too, music was where it was happening, where all the interesting writers were. It was like poetry was in England in the early 1800s. So that's where the creativity was. So it drew us.
Yeah, the big thinkers actually were writing about it. I mean, you think about early magazines like I Magazine. A lot of the people who became legitimate New York Times writers, like Janet Maslin, and now I'm spacing on who else there was, but it was like they were erudite without being inaccessible, and I wanted to be part of that. I always wanted to be a music writer, though. I really didn't have lofty aims. I just felt like, again, I just was just processing through the music, and I had this uncanny ability to just figure out what musicians were thinking or what they were hiding, and I pretty much made my career on that, just psychoanalyzing rock stars. And I don't know, it's probably from working at that ballroom for 3 years, like giving them soft drinks and watching them when they didn't know they were being watched. But it felt like music was what I was going to write about, and it's been my lifelong life. I mean, I have written about clowns and architects and worked for the San Francisco Chronicle, but I'm always drawn back to music because I'm not as interested. It's like zoning commissions, Chuck. It's like, given the choice, what are you going to write about? Music,
I kind of miss writing about zoning commissions, actually. But, I'm in sewage boards. But I think the thing about music criticism,
I think that's the quote that we're going to use from this.
I'll go full circle somehow. But I mean, music criticism somehow provided this frame where you could work in everything else. And I think that's the way that people at CREEM did. It wasn't like you only wrote about music. You wrote about music. And I mean, Dave Marsh is a pretty good example about this, with all the social justice stuff. It's like it gives you a window somehow onto the rest of the world. So I could write about sewage boards as part of music criticism. I don't know whether I ever did that, but I definitely wrote about baseball sometimes as part of music criticism. Or, as a lot of CREEM writers did, their lives. And I think I like what Susan said. It's kind of like a genre of its own. And I don't know whether by the time I was writing in the early 80s, I would say that that's where the best writing was, but it's somehow just where I fit.
Yeah. What again, we're talking about the origins of music writing. What writers, I mean, could be music or otherwise, influenced you? I was just talking to Jan the other day about this, and I remember the earliest music writing that really excited me was Nick Cohen. He had this book from 1969 called Rock from the Beginning, and it had everything. It was, engaging, stylistically quick and funny, and, was brilliant in his own way. I mean, who were the people that you guys, plugged into?
Nick Cohen was always my favorite. There weren't a lot of women rock writers, like I mentioned Janet Maslin, but she was writing about film. Nora Ephron in Esquire had a column, I think it's called Crazy Salad. It was a lot of personality. This is like the cusp of me journalism, like where you became part of the story and that was okay. And I took a lot from those writers. And that was really the CREEM ethos, especially with Lester Bangs. I mean, he was a part of probably every story he ever wrote. I mean, the use of the personal pronoun was all over his work. But really, Nick Cohen like set the tone for the specifics, the little things that you notice that people don't really notice, like the kind of shoes somebody's wearing and whether they're worn down. Like objects held information about an artist, and everything was everything. That '70s phrase where your music became an extension of who you were and how you lived and how you got information. And I think that's what Nick Cohen did so brilliantly, and his descriptions were so key. I think he's the king of all that. There's a guy named Michael Thomas, I don't even know if he's still around. And then Richard Goldstein, who was a Village Voice guy who wrote that book, Poetry of Rock, and he wrote a really great piece about the MC5 that I loved. I carried around my files. So, I used to have this crazy thing, like before I'd write something, I would read something I loved to make sure I could equal that or at least approach that. So they were really my first teachers, and again, not a lot of women, Ellen Willis, but I didn't know about her then.
Lillian Roxon.
Yeah, not really. You know what? Speaking of women, though, there were a lot of women at newspapers, and I know it's the same milieu that Dave grew up in, because he's just a few years older than me. We had teen writers that they were the people who were writing about music in the early '60s and mid '60s when we started reading newspapers. So it would be Sharon Cassidy at the Detroit News, and it was Lorraine Alterman at the Free Press. So that's how you would read about what Marvin Gaye was up to. And I did read 16 magazine. Yep. That was, of course, female edited. And I too was a Nick Cohen freak. I was an English major, and so I was into all the romantic poets and Hemingway and this and that. But I had gone to England on a Michigan State thing, and we had a course in recent British literature that was all pop culture. So it was all Nick Cohen and all this great stuff. So I was able to talk to British rock stars about what they read growing up in the 50s in Britain, because I kind of studied that as well. But yeah, and I think I didn't know about it at the time, but all of the Black newspapers were running great stuff about a lot of the soul and R&B acts that I'm interested in. So we think we invented music journalism in the 60s, but of course we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, I mean, my early influences are, it's cliches, but Marcus and Christgau and Bangs and Meltzer and Marsh. But one thing I realized is those guys are all born in the 40s, but Dave was born in 1950. But Lillian Roxon, who published the Rock Encyclopedia in 1969, was born in 1932.
Oh my God.
Gloria Stavers, who edited 16, was born in 1927. Jane Scott, who was the teen critic, Susan says, the teen writer at the Cleveland Plain Dealer, covered the Beatles' 66 tour of England, reviewed them when they came to Cleveland in 64. She was born in 1919. So I kind of think that there might be like an unwritten story here that I kind of wonder whether rock really was invented by women. I mean, you throw in people like and they were, I mean, they only were right only peripherally. Susan Sontag, born in 1933, published Notes on Camp, I think in 64. Joan Didion, born in 34. They're all like at least a half decade older than people like Christgau and Marcus and Marsh and Bangs. I mean, I'm not saying they were the only ones. I mean, Leroy Jones, who published Blues People in, I think, 63. I mean, I almost think you have to consider him one of the first rock critics, an African-American man who doesn't get credit. And I mean, there's the people coming out of the folk, like Sing Out, like Paul Nelson or whatever. But what really struck me when I kind of started thinking about this week was how prominent, how really the first people, maybe, I don't say take it seriously, but did Gloria Stavers take rock seriously at 16? But did that matter? I don't know. But I kind of do think it might be like an unwritten history, or maybe it has been written and I just never read it.
And Chuck, I think having worked at a newspaper, I kind of saw how that happened with the older generation. To me, one woman told me one time she became the garden writer because the editor came out and pointed at her, right. You're going to do it. So in a sense, they were skilled writers, but they didn't really come up and like, I'm going to be a music writer. No, they were assigned it. And oftentimes I think they thought women in the feature department had an affinity for young people or whatever. So send them off to do the Beatles.
Right.
If you look at the 1956 coverage in newspapers of Elvis Presley, it's hilarious. They're all adults covering him.
Yeah.
Half the time they're making fun of him, calling him a hillbilly. But that's the way newspapers were. They had adults working, and that's who got the assignment. So similar, I think at the Free Press, Lorraine Alterman was one of the teen writer. She was younger. Sharon Cassidy was a little older, but a lot of them were adult women. And for Jane, for instance, and they just happened to be in the right place at the wrong or right time. And hey, you're going to go do this. So
No,
yeah.
that makes total sense. I mean, as somebody who worked for newspapers, I also have a journalism degree from University of Missouri, by the way, and I've written for daily papers. It wasn't considered hard news. And I think that there probably was a sexism there where it was assumed that, I think that's what you're saying, that women, instead of, covering, wars or whatever, or politics, were given what was considered news. But the women I mentioned, it wasn't just that they were women, they were adults.
Right.
And I think that those three, I mean, I've never read Lillian Roxon's Rock Encyclopedia. I have no idea, how good or bad it is. Just the fact that it exists, though, I think is.
It was pretty good.
I should get it. I hadn't really thought of it until.
Her writing, I recently revisited some stuff that she did on Janice Joplin. I was sort of blown away by it. I mean, she was really a good writer.
She wasn't American. She was like
Australian.
Well, born in Italy to like Croatian, Ukrainian parents, I think. Then she moved to Australia, and then eventually wrote for the Sydney News. It was a correspondence from New York, I think. But yeah.
I really want to say something about the R&B press, though, the Black newspapers, because talk about the folk writers, whatever. There was a guy, George Pitts, with the Pittsburgh Courier, who was writing a column called Rock and Roll Department in 1953. So that way predates a lot of this stuff. And back then, of course, they had the wonderful definition of rock and roll as being everything from, R&B, rock and roll, whatever. It was broad. It was huge. And I think they got away with more, and they were more entertainment focused than the mainstream newspapers were.
And I get this, it's probably more reporting than criticizing in a lot of these.
They were. I mean,
yeah. Like when you talk about the women writers and I don't know, the people you mentioned at the News for Free Press, it was more like going to reporting on a concert, right? I mean, as opposed to, and I know that's
although, by the time Lorraine Alterman came in at the Free Press, she was doing criticism, but most of her job and most of their jobs were reporting. What's the new album coming out? What are they doing? Why are they going to England? Why? And in Detroit, there was an endless amount of information because we had Motown exploding, and then you had the British invasion, and often those two things were coinciding and going back and forth. The Beatles were coming here and meeting with Motown, and so I know I was an avid reader of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure Jane Scott in Cleveland, I think that she had been a fan of Alan Freed or whatever. Or, I mean, I don't know whether she was, one of the first. I assume she was one of the oldest. But I mean, I think that there's probably a reason why a lot of that was happening in papers in Cleveland and Detroit too.
Yeah, I don't think she was the first, because I think she started with the Beatles. And I think these teen writers definitely started before the Beatles. It was early 60s.
Hey guys, part of the conference is partly about the impact that Dave Marsh had on rock journalism. I was wondering what your particular working relationship was with him, and maybe the ways that he influenced you or your career.
Well, he's part of my creation myth. Eventually, but he actually fooled me into covering Smokey Robinson's retirement. He knew how over the top I was about Smokey Robinson, and Smokey Robinson was retiring, and I was crushed. I was really like teenage crushed about this. And he goes, well, I'm going to the press conference. Why don't you come with me? And I thought that meant drive me. So I went. And I did not take a notepad. I really just was there super sad because, you know, your favorite band is breaking up. And what happened was we were there for the entirety. I drive him home and we get back to, I get back to my parents' house, and that night he calls me. I always think it's 2 weeks, but he always tells me it was the same night. And he goes, well, where's your copy? And I'm like, what copy? And he goes, you have to write a piece about this. And honestly, I had never written anything before. I was 19 years old. I was a journalism student at Wayne State, and I was writing about zoning boards. I was going to city council meetings, and he said, get over here, he was living in Walled Lake at the time. He goes, get over here, get all my Miracles records in the morning. I want something. So I drove in my checkered bathrobe to his house, picked up the albums, played them all night long, and I came up with an open letter to Smokey Robinson. God knows how I even got to that, but it was just, I begged him not to leave. And that turned out to be the cover story. So that gave me great confidence, like I could do this. And if it wasn't for David, I wouldn't have had that chance. Again, I might have had to work my way up the ranks of something else, but I think it was just tired of me complaining that I didn't have any stories or whatever it was. But, you know, God bless him. That was.
Did you ever hear back from Smokey about that? Do you know did he ever see the piece?
Actually, the Miracles got in touch with me, and they adopted me for a while. Like, the wives invited me to a Tupperware party, which I went to. So I would hear from them intermittently. So I was kind of in their circle, but not Smokey. I did interview Smokey later on, but he was very show busy and very like, did I say superficial? I thought superficial. That the Miracles were great. David,
well, they can't, you know, the Motown people were groomed for a certain kind of showbiz.
Yeah. You mean they didn't really like me? Okay, I'm the one who, with Lester, always.
Did you buy any Tupperware? It's probably because you didn't buy any Tupperware.
I did buy Tupperware. Are you kidding? And they gave me bracelets. I had these kind of ghetto fabulous bracelets that the wives gave me that they all wore. Wow. So, but this was before I even realized that, you know, that people are actually, this sounds so cynical. People are nice to you because of your position, because of the job. And I actually thought they liked me. I guess, but I think with David, he was reckless. He would do anything. My favorite story he ever wrote, and this is not taking anything away, and I know, Brad, you don't love it as much as I do, but he did this thing called the Who Primer, which was constructed like a Dick and Jane reader that we all had in first grade. Like, see Peter play, look at Peter hurt our ears. You know, it was like, I love that. I think what people miss in all of his social justice and causes, he's got this wicked sense of humor, and he will just do anything. And he really pushed us to do the same thing. So I don't know, he continues to inspire me, and he continues to argue with me. And, you know, I think that rock writing wouldn't be what it was, but it was more of a serious endeavor when David was at CREEM. You know, he took his music much more seriously than we did. And I loved your quote about Chuck about, you know, we took our music seriously but didn't take writing about music seriously. I think that was true, but I think David took both of it seriously. He's a serious guy. He's a committed, serious guy, an intellectual where we weren't. So that's my David story.
Sue?
My David story, I think what he did in the pages of CREEM was he understood that it was important to write in as exciting a manner as the music sounded to him, as the MC5 affected him at that time. And that's the gift of CREEM, I think, that really intense, focused language that would give you the same feeling. Now, he thinks that Lester took that and ran with it, where he kind of grew out of it a bit. But I know when I was reading his story on Seeger that it really, I think he hit on some things, some aspects of Bob Seeger that nobody else ever has. And that was this, we're talking 1971. And my personal thing with him was, I think Dave left in 73 and I came in 75 as a staffer. So he would come back as the returning hero, and he'd have a big dinner next door at the Midtown, and he would be the the prodigal son. And it would be great because to be in his presence and having him pay attention and talk about what your latest story was great. We worked directly together when I was on strike from the paper, from the Detroit News at that time. And I asked him if he thought, I had interviewed so many Motown women, especially. I asked him, what do you think if I did a book on the women of Motown, kind of? And as only Dave can be, he said, no, it's a terrible idea. So I go, okay, and I'll go back to the picket line. I'm sorry. And next thing I know, it's like, couldn't have been more than a month later, I get a call. He said, hey, you know that idea of yours about women in Motown? Think you could do it as a oral history? And I said, I'll do it standing on my head. So boom, he says, well, I think I could use it in my my oral history of rock and roll series. Oh, yes, thank you. So that kept me alive partly during the strike. And also he let Bruce know about what was going on with our newspaper strike. And Bruce made a huge boost to us by talking about it at the Fox Theater show he did. And I can't remember if it was 96 or 97. It was a huge shot in the arm for Detroit newspaper strikers. And that was all thanks to Dave and his sense of justice. And it was because all the stuff I've been telling him, everything I've been telling Dave about what the issues we were going through at the newspaper, and he was funneling it directly to Bruce. And it just had a wonderful effect that we'll always be thankful.
Again, it's sort of that melding of politics and culture and music, and the forefront of that. Chuck, I don't think you worked with Dave, but
no, I haven't worked directly with him, and we haven't been in touch that much over the last couple of decades. But which is kind of interesting because I think that by the late 90s, early 00s, I was writing about Kid Rock, Eminem, White Stripes, the way that he had written about Seeger and Mitch Ryder and the MC5. I think we both came out of a kind of a point of view where the Midwest, and specifically Michigan, is sort of the center of the universe. I don't know if it's like a Midwest chauvinism or whatever, but I also grew up in Oakland County like he did. I did write a piece for this book he put out in 1983. I had just started writing for The Voice, and he asked me to write an essay in here about metal, long before I did my metal book, Stairway to Hell. And I think the thing is, I had perceived it as kind of a working class white music. And I think I think the class angle is what made him interested in my writing there. So probably the only direct contact I've had, working relationship with him, and it holds up pretty well. The book's really interesting. It's mostly a collection of, before it was called Rock and Rap Confidential, his newsletter was called Rock and Roll Confidential with Lee Ballinger. Later in the 80s, we had some differences, and I can't really remember what the specifics were. Dave is a populist in a lot of ways in his tastes. And I think I was looking to split the difference between his stance and stance of people who were at fanzines who were a lot more artsy or avant-garde, or what he. And the thing is, I had a kind of suspicion about coastal, about what people now would call elitist, and it's kind of embarrassing now because that whole Midwest chauvinism thing can get kind of reactionary. And in ways Dave's politics isn't, but there's sort of a germ there of reaction, I guess. But I think Dave and I have some things in common, and I don't know. I guess that's my answer.
Well, you bring up something that's part of Dave's legend, if you will, is that he could be a little prickly at times, but that's part of being a music critic, no?
Oh,
having an opinion, and
I think I was prickly first. I think it was prickling back, if I remember right, but I don't know what specifics were.
In retrospect, I don't think it's been given its due, maybe in more recent years, but it's sort of fascinating how egalitarian CREEM was. You know, it didn't seem to be as much about, you know, gender or your reputation or whatever. It was like, you know, come one, come all.
What's interesting is that, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
But I mean, CREEM always had that wonderful letters column. I mean, honestly, the best letters column I've ever seen in any magazine of any kind. And it's one thing I don't even know if it was mentioned in the movie last year. I think there was one snarky letter about the Runaways or whatever. But I mean, the letters column was hilarious, and a lot of those letters, I mean, several of those letter writers ended up being CREEM writers. And I know Rick Johnson had written Consumer Guide to Rock Critics in like 1971 or whatever. Who else? I'm blanking out. Jeffrey Morgan, I think, started out as a letter writer. There were definitely people as late as the 80s, and Sue and Jam might know more than I do. And I think that's kind of that egalitarianism is it's just like you didn't have to have a degree in this stuff. And honestly, in some ways, CREEM was a pretty intellectual magazine, but it was intellectual in a funny way. I mean, it was smart. It was as smart as, I mean, probably a lot smarter than Rolling Stone as far as writing about music, but funnier than Rolling Stone or Spin or Entertainment Weekly or any of those other music magazines. It was funny, and no, I can't think of any other magazine that came close.
Well, the biggest sin is to bore people. It's like we had to be entertaining, we had to have fun, and you could tell people were having fun when you read it. Yeah. We did. And I still read captions, and I try to guess who wrote what. And I remember us trying to make each other laugh. That was the biggest deal in the office, make each other laugh with the captions. You know?
And those captions are huge.
Well, what I tell people is that was probably the beginning of meme culture. Like the earliest memes are probably, you know, CREEM photo captions, which is essentially
right in the backstage section.
Oh my God, I thought you were going to say mean, MEAN.
No. No, but sort of getting back to this idea of it being egalitarian, you know, I was wondering, you know, Sue, you became an editor-in-chief. Jan, Dave gave you opportunity. You were a senior editor. How much do you think that Marsh brought that DNA to the magazine?
I had sisters and aunts, and I asked them that too. You know, I think it was partially him, it was partially Barry Kramer. A lot of it was economic. It was pretty much we would work for free, and you had to be gutsy to get in the door. Barry's first assistant, Sandra Strutke, said the thing about CREEM, because I asked her, because she was there from pretty much the first 6 months, and I asked her, like, what was the process of hiring people? Like, who did you know would fit? And she said, it's like, you say this about Santa Fe, like Santa Fe, New Mexico, you don't choose to live there, it chooses you. And the same thing is about CREEM. It's like you walk in the door and you were immediately tested, what male or female. It's like Barry Kramer would do something really hostile and really fucked up and really embarrassing, and you had to pass the test. If you passed the test, you were in. Yeah. So it didn't matter. So you had to have a big personality, you had to be gutsy, and you had to not wear your sensitivity on your sleeve. You know, you couldn't ever let them see you cry, sweat, or anything, you know.
I learned that. I learned that from Barry Kramer. Yeah. Right. He definitely made me cry one time and then informed me that I was never to cry again. That was
There's no crying in CREEM magazine.
No crying, no tears.
Lester went in and kind of roughed him up a little too. But,
right. I remember that. Well, I wasn't there, but I remember that whole scenario.
I think the thing with women, though, I think CREEM was subversive, and I think women as rock writers are subversive. So I think that we were turning things around and making it not so obvious. So I know this happened to Jan as well. You know, sometimes you go into a situation as a woman and they would be discombobulated. They weren't used to being interviewed by women, and it could be to our advantage a lot of times, but we were the opposite of what they expected. But I think the subversiveness worked well with the CREEM ethos and all that. That we were not what you were expecting, and we were going to surprise you, and better hold on.
It's
You know,
interesting.
honestly, I thought it's because we worked for free. Do you know what I mean? Like anybody who would go in
They
there
were
and
being
work for
paid by the
free.
time I came.
Yeah, well, when I got there, we got 22.75 maybe once a month. Um, but I never thought of it as subversive. That's really a good point that I have to think about because I didn't think they were doing that because of that. Robbie Kruger, who's there before me, always reminds me is women at CREEM. We still had to do secretarial work because no one was hired just as an editor or as a writer. Like I was hired as a subscription kid. Roberta was Barry's assistant, and Connie Kramer was assistant to the publisher. And she said, do you just forget that we had to do our office stuff and then at night we would write? And I absolutely forgot that. Like I think
Well,
about CREEM as the good times. And by the time you were there, you know,
yeah,
you came
I
in as
lucked out.
editorial. Yeah,
I
you did.
lucked out. No, I mean, and you have to, CREEM was over a long period of time, considering how intense it was. Because, you know, it started in 1969. I came along in 1975, and pretty much, except for editorial assistant stuff, when you first started as a young editor, as a new editor, there really wasn't any secretarial stuff. We had the secretarial pool outside in the outer office run by Sue Siegel with an iron fist. And we didn't have to do that stuff. And we didn't come in till like 1 p.m. usually. I found that out the hard way. My first day, official day of work at CREEM, I arrived in my little blouse and bell-bottom jeans at maybe 10 o'clock, 9:30, and the secretaries were laughing at me, and the editorial room was locked up. So I had to sit outside the editorial room until, I can't remember if it was Lester who came first and unlocked the door. And then I could go in and start my career. But they said, don't ever do that again. Don't ever come in early.
That's awesome.
Anyway, to me, it's interesting that, I mean, maybe this is a subversiveness that Susan's talking about. There's something, the feel of CREEM, there's kind of a bro feeling about the magazine itself. I mean,
Bro?
what later in England might have been called Lad Magazine or whatever. Like you have the CREEM Dream thing, for instance. You don't think that that's there at all?
No.
I
was writing a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. We were writing the copy for those CREEM Dreams.
Well,
Yeah,
the CREEM Dreams
writing
were
notes.
the CREEM Dreams were subversive in and of themselves. I mean, they had like Martin Mull as one of them, you know. So
Sure.
there's always a little bit of a wink,
absolutely.
you know.
I mean, the Stars, Cars too, and which
Yeah.
I think is similar. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't take it that way. I think that it would later be taken that way, or at least later music magazines would never do something like that. There wouldn't even be something like CREEM Dream in something like, say, Spin, which started publishing in the mid 80s. I mean, that's, you know,
sometimes, and Jan knows what I'm talking about. Sometimes the envelope would be pushed and we would push back and say, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, when I grew up with brothers, you know, we would just say, shut up, you're not going to write that. Or I'm going to write something that makes fun of you for writing that. And no, a lot of the snark in there was female snark.
sure.
Yeah, I mean, Jan, I mean, when we've talked about this in the past, you've said you felt that there was a little bit of gender blindness. It was more about like, can you get shit done, which is a very contemporary or a more contemporary attitude.
I do think it was like that. I mean, it took a while. You were tested. Like even when Sue came, I remember like she was tested because the then editor just gave her tapes to transcribe and wouldn't give her assignments. But I think once you prove that you could do it.
But that happened to me at Guitar World too, for the record.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I mean, everybody goes through a hazing process, you know. I think it's part of the process of being a new kid, you know.
Yeah, to see if you'll do it.
You know, the nice editors didn't do that. I'll leave it at that. Lester never would do that to me. Jan didn't do that to me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the male writers coming in would go through the same thing that you did?
No.
I mean, was there any difference?
No, but they came in as full-fledged editors, you know.
Except for Eric. Eric was a male boy, remember?
Yeah. Eric Genheimer, who turned out to be a really fine writer, came out same door I did, you know. It's that thing where they hire from within. I just was annoyed. I just asked for assignments all the time, you know, and then and then executed them and would come up with ideas. But again, it's the criteria for being at CREEM was really that big personality, that big pushy personality. That's the one thing we maybe.
I guess I faked it.
No, you didn't fake it. I think you're faking it now. You were pretty pushy.
You know, one of the things that I thought, again, more as a consumer of the magazine, what made it unique was that it was really one of the first outlets that I thought genuinely reflected a 70s sort of post-political, post-Vietnam attitude. You know, kids weren't worried about the draft, sort of. They wanted to have fun. It was a little more narcissistic, you know, than you know, maybe what was going on at Rolling Stone or Crawdaddy. And it's almost when Dave left that the magazine found maybe its voice.
I think you can draw kind of a dichotomy there. For Dave's era is MC5 era, and you know, talk about, by the way, a really male sweaty band. I mean, you know, they're politically radical, but I mean they're a frat. They're MC5 are like SDS frat boys or something. But anyway, when Dave's gone, really, if I wanted to pick the artist who I thought was most typically CREEM, it wouldn't be the MC5, it'd be Alice Cooper. And the people I went to, I assume a lot of the people I went to high school with, even though they didn't end up being music critics, they grew up reading CREEM. I graduated in '78 in West Bloomfield. And yeah, that Rolling Stone had a 60s sensibility. Crawdaddy obviously probably had a 60s sensibility, but CREEM was like it was prototype 70s sensibility. And part of it is the whole junk culture thing, and like I said, the not taking yourself seriously thing. I think that's a real, in some ways, a 70s attitude.
Yeah.
And that was the era
almost
of
post-political or something.
And that was the era of glam and glitter rock, though, and that was totally hedonistic. So we were definitely reflecting that. I think that where politics maybe came in, it was more sociology. It was all the writing that we did about drugs, what the latest drugs would be, that kind of thing. And there was a lot of that at the beginning, but it's still, we had a whole cover story on green, which was going to be the next drug, supposedly. I remember planning that out with Robert Duncan and Lester.
You know, it's like Guy Lombardo used to say on Laugh-In. Okay, this is really old school reference, but he used to have this thing. He'd say, "When I die, I'm taking New Year's Eve with me," because he used to be the band leader. And actually, when Dave left CREEM, the politics went with him. And yeah, it was the time. So we extended the politics probably till when he left. Like, you know, I think 73 was when he left. And I think if he had one comment about later CREEM is that we didn't cover Black artists enough, and the politics went off. So, and those were his legacies, and it was a different magazine, but they were never going to work together because all the arguments that happened in that little nexus of Lester and David, because they came from such different points of view. California, Detroit, you know, and what Lester reveled, I mean, he was serious about jazz and he was serious about music, but his sense of humor and his need for attention were much greater than his need to push us forward as a culture, to make a difference. So he won. David left, he won. And we pretty much fell in behind that because it was fun to write about. It was fun to write about clothes. It was fun to write about drugs. It was fun to, you know, create these high concept things like Alice Cooper's like Guide to LA, like his alcoholic cookbook, you know, all of those kind of shtick things.
And people wanted to have fun in the 70s. It was, you know, culture was fun, music, movies, TV, all of that.
I agree with Chuck. I sort of think Alice Cooper was the Bob Dylan of the 70s, you know, like he captured a certain attitude and, you know, sense of humor, junk culture, that kind of thing.
Like a word that rhymes.
But I also see sort of like the difference being between the hippie ethos and the punk ethos too. I mean, you know, you have that from going from the 60s to the 70s, and it's just part of the larger culture. You know, hippies it was a more political thing. I think it was, and then the punk idea was more that the rebellion was sort of against mainstream culture than it was politics at large.
I think Cream probably helped invent punk in a lot of ways. And I mean, I don't want to overplay how much punk or whatever was embedded in the Detroit area, with the Stooges and MC5 or whatever. But there's sort of a bridge. I mean, maybe Cream was proto-punk. What I want to say what Cream really was suburban. And I mean, I understand it started in the Cass Corridor, went through Walled Lake or Birmingham, but it is 70s suburbia. And it's kind of, I mean, I've often wondered, like, could there be a magazine like Cream now? I mean, is that even remotely possible? And I mean, Cream, I think, held on through the 80s, and a lot more than that movie last year suggested. It's almost like the movie ended when Lester Bangs died, and then next thing you know, Cream's going bankrupt in LA. There's a whole decade in between there where Cream was probably the best music magazine in the country. But it's not just a 70s ethos, it's a 70s suburban ethos. And I think the punk thing is that trash culture thing, which obviously people like the Ramones were tuned into or whatever. And Cream embraced that. I mean, Meltzer, I don't know, to what extent was Meltzer in Cream? I can't, I'm trying to remember.
He had a column.
Early on.
And he did record reviews. And
I mean, he put out his book Gulcher, and I think whatever it was, 71, and he wasn't even writing about music anymore. It was about bottle caps or, I mean, just whatever junk he could quote review. And I think Cream was tuned into that. And yeah, culture itself can be subversive and can be political, obviously.
I mean, I do want to spend a minute or two, we're talking about the origins of rock criticism, and we've evoked the name of Lester many times during the course of our discussion. And you could probably devote 90 minutes to this subject, but really quickly, what impact do you think Lester, who was sort of took over from Dave from Cream, had on rock writing and had on you personally?
I think he injected that fun element that he was much more, David was irreverent about his politics and his thinking and was fearlessly intellectual. And Lester was fearlessly personally fearless, where he would be confrontational. He would provoke fun, like artists. It was really, he would get stories by really very aggressive means. I mean, you had to be in on one of those mass Lou Reed interviews to see what I mean. But he also then gave it a kind of a uniformity in style. He had such a pronounced style with his alliteration and his like bringing in characters like the old geezer who's sitting on the front porch in a rocking chair. Like he actually made it almost fiction-esque with him as one of the primary characters. So it became a different form. It became a little one step removed from reporting. It became creative nonfiction. And I think that changed the way
Before it had a name.
Rock was written, like rock writing was written from then on.
Yeah, and I do like to stress to people though how serious Lester was about his writing, and that was very impressive to me. And he had all sorts of writing tips that I still go by. Like, I'd say all dramatic, I've got writer's block, and he'd say there's no such thing as writer's block. Just start typing and shut up. He's right. And he would also he would like look at a story I had written and diagram it basically and tell me, oh no, you need to do this up here. And he was talking about leads without using that language. And people would try to copy him. Younger writers would come in and or write stuff that was just gibberish, what they wrote when they were drunk. And it wasn't the same because he was disciplined about his writing. And he always said, you write something when you're drunk or high and you think it's great, but the next morning you're going to look at it and it's trash. And I always took that seriously. And I know, like I said, I would advise young writers, don't imitate him, find your own voice, but also don't imitate what you think Lester is. You think he's just drugging and drinking and being a wild man. And he did promote that image of himself. He did. But that wasn't the serious writer who was staying up all night writing and writing. He wrote more than any human being I know. He was constantly writing. So that seriousness, I think I try to convey to people, because otherwise you're not understanding Lester.
There was always a point, I mean, to his writing. That's the whole thing, is that, everything was a device to get him to his point. And it wasn't just sort of Dada nonsense or something like that, And
in some ways, he's a horrible influence. Just because of all the people who tried to imitate him or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think his idea was that you can't separate. You can't be detached. You're involved in the writing. I mean, and that's the first person thing. I know a lot of that came out of new journalism, and Hunter S. Thompson and all those people. But you're directly part of the not like in any self-indulgent way, but that it's impossible to separate yourself from what you're writing about when you're writing about music. And that's where the power and I think the liveliness, the energy of his writing came from in a lot of ways.
I also have to say something about him. He always thought in any situation involving a man and a woman that the woman was always right. So I've seen some things where people have thought, oh, he's so sexist, and he was a misogynist. No, he wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Sue, I wanted to touch on this a bit too, is that, and it's something that Chuck talked about on how, people sort of, because of the iconography, if you will, of Dave Marsh and Lester and Jan were so strong in those early days of CREEM. I mean, CREEM went on and under your stewardship. And when I was editing the 50th anniversary issue, I revisited the whole history of CREEM, and I was reading, and I thought in some ways, the quality of writing actually went up under your stewardship. I mean, like literally to use the word, like the literary quality of it. There was,
well,
what was your sort of take on that? I mean, what were you trying to do as editor?
I think, CREEM had started, it was such an organic thing. It started in the back trunk of Barry's car. And actually before that, when Tony Ray was the first one to do it in the head shop, and it organically grew and became slightly more professional. And I think it was, who was it? It was who brought in actual professional editing standards. Help me, Jan.
John Morthland.
It was Morthland.
Yeah.
Morthland, God bless him. He came in and had more of a structure. So by the time I started in 75, we had this 3 editors have to sign off on the typeset copy, and then 3 editors on the corrected copy. And it was, believe it or not, before it was just whoever was there read it and then threw it in. So
it
you
was
could
a bit
see
more of a fanzine almost.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
So you could see the difference it was more consistent in terms of our style and what we were catching errors more. So there was a continuation of that, but we also had some wonderful, like, Nick Toshis he needed money at one point, and it was like, I went into Connie and it's like, we got to get Nick some money, and how about we run this a column? And so we got to have, unsung heroes of rock and roll that way. We had so many wonderful writers who were starting to blossom, including Rick Johnson. Rick had started years before that, but he was just doing little bitsy things, and then he started just exploding, and everything that Rick pitched me on, I'd say, yes, do it. Because there'd never be a bad copy from Rick. And that just, I think it was a blossoming of a bunch of different things. Our editing process was more structured from 73, 74 on. And then the writers were coming into their own, and there were more, and the music scene was just exciting as heck. So
Chuck, how did were you working? Chuck, you and Sue working together at
No,
CREEM?
no, I did. Like I say, I didn't start working writing for CREEM until the DiMartino hold ship era.
Well, Dave came in under me though, so I'm not exactly sure. When was your first byline? What year?
Must have been 85.
Okay, well, you were later. Okay, because I left in 83.
But one thing I can't remember, and this is weird, this is even later than you, and this has to just be getting older. How did you do a signing of articles in like the pre-email era? I've totally blocked from my memory. Like, did I have?
Cell phone.
And I know you're earlier, but like, I'm trying to remember. Did I have phone conversations with editors like every month, or did we write back and forth?
Yeah.
How did you do it?
Telephone. I think, and I think one of the funniest things I remember, Billy Altman was our record review editor, and he was in New York. So he would gather all the record reviews from all of our freelancers from all around the country, and then he would ship them to the Royal Oak post office. And I had to go over there and knock on the back door. I guess there was no FedEx, there was no overnight delivery. That was the best they could do, post office to post office. And so I would pick up the record review section at the back door of the post office and then bring it back, and we'd edit it and slap it in. So we had so many primitive, looking back on it, primitive methods.
Billy was in New York then?
Yeah.
So
he always was in New York.
That's a lot of phone time. So basically, are people calling him and saying, these are the albums I want to review this month? Can I do one?
No, I think he was calling them, and there might have been he could speak to that better. I'm sure there was
the process.
I'm sure it was a combination of I'd like to do this when
Hey guys, believe it or not, I mean the time's been flying by, and I think that they want us to take some questions from people out there. But I want to bring the conversation around full circle just for a second. And it's interesting to me. So CREEM had sort of moved away from Dave's sort of more cultural, political way of thinking. But it seems to me it's sort of gone full circle. I mean, would you say that, now that sort of Dave's almost way of thinking about writing about music is more relevant, or more probably in the way people have to approach it, that music has become so enmeshed in politics and culture and so on and so forth these days?
Well, I think you need, people used to find their identity in the music they wanted. They self-identify Beatles, Stones, Sex Pistols, Clash, whatever it was, and then that stopped. Politics became more important, as we all lived through the Trump era. It's like you had to have some kind of protest because things were so terrible. I mean, even now, artists can't be apolitical. You can't just say, no, I'm a musician, it's in my lyrics. That just is wimping out, and that's unacceptable in these days. So I do think that it's come back because artists are taking a stance. Artists do put in their lyrics, but they're much more forthright. I'm a media trainer now, and I spend a lot of time going through certain topics that would have been taboo, or I wouldn't have let clients talk about them. And now I make them find their authentic voice. And I'm not as concerned, nor are they, about alienating their fans, because, like Ars Amir, you attract the people that are most like you. I mean, I'm sure that Ted Nugent doesn't have a lot of enlightened fans, So I do think that his way is the way now. I mean, music criticism isn't as frivolous. If there is even music criticism, I mean, that's a whole other topic.
I mean, honestly, I'm kind of oblivious to the state of music criticism right now. I just don't read that much of it. Yeah. But I guess I'm a little skeptical that there would be that much more politics, say, in the people writing reviews in Rolling Stone or Pitchfork now than there would have been, 20 years ago. But I think Jan makes a good point. I mean, all these artists have Twitter feeds, and where Richard Marx or Glenn Danzig stand politically now in a way that you wouldn't have. I'm not on Twitter, but I mean, so I guess there's that. But whether it's part of music criticism, I honestly don't know. I get the idea Pitchfork, for example, is fairly apolitical, but I'm not the one to ask.
Well, by political, I don't necessarily mean Donald Trump, although, Bernie Sanders, I guess, is a big part of it, but we're also talking about race and those topics as well, which is so prevalent in hip hop, it's almost impossible to think or write about it without there being.
If you're going to write about Beyonce, you're going to write about Black Lives Matter, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that what I regret looking at the scene now is there's so much chatter on social media, so much going on, and artists telling you everything they've done that day, and there's no mystery anymore. And I think the beauty of when we were at CREEM was we would be revealing things that people didn't know. Now there's no mystery, nothing left to reveal, including your political feelings.
I mean, I hate the idea that you have to know everything about artists' lives now, and I think that doesn't come out of Twitter. Hey, I mean, hip hop rappers rap about their lives in a way that very few rock bands did. I mean, Leonard Skinner about the Hoople, Hank Williams Jr. a little bit, but it's just you didn't assume that what they sang in their songs was something that physically happened in their lives. Now I think there's not that wall, and I'm not crazy about that. I don't want to know that much about rock stars' lives, and I don't want it when I write about music. I don't want to have to know that stuff. I want to be able to. I want to make up their biography. To be honest, I want to lie. I do. I mean, it's
usually better.
Yeah, it's usually.
No, I do. I like that they have mystery, and my goal from the day I started till the last piece I wrote is to somehow find out their mystery, their essentialness, and then share it. I mean, call me nosy. My password used to always be curious one. I'm just nosy. I really want the mystery, but I want to be able to solve it too. And maybe that's why I did news for so many years. So I mean, that's my ethos. But I always thought that it was revolutionary that artists took to Twitter because they took back control. Instead of other people revealing parts of their life, they got to do it themselves and control the information,
See, I hate that.
And
I don't like to be in control.
I hate that too, actually,
What I see is Dave's influence is more in the being opinionated and actually telling people, no, I don't agree with you. And I don't see that in modern music writing as much as I like. And not being afraid to say something that's terrible. It's just terrible. You don't see that.
That doesn't
you
happen.
don't see bad reviews.
I mean, I think that, and I know we need to start asking questions. There were a couple of readings that were suggested. There was an essay he had written for Rock and Rap Confidential in the early 90s about how at some point you had to start reviewing records the week or even the day they came out or whatever. You don't get to live with them. And I think, and he doesn't mention, I think it's amazing that he was writing that in 1993, because I think that the real beginning of that was SoundScan. The whole emphasis on first week sales, which in 1991, and Entertainment Weekly, which is the first place that I remember that you had to review stuff the week that it came out. And both of those are industry driven. They're not driven by the critic. They're driven by the business, and that wrecked a lot, I think.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. We had so much access back in the CREEM days, and we didn't get. It wasn't as engineered by publicists, by record company publicists, as it is today. Like to have a publicist on the line while you're interviewing somebody, we would never put up with that.
In CREEM, it's just like you piss the publicist off, and an interview's canceled. You put them on the cover anyway. And you find something making fun of them.
We also told them we wouldn't put them on the cover, but we still got the interview,
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes we review records twice because you would have to live with it. And we did live with it. We weren't really slaves to a timeline, to a release date.
Right.
Well, Lester's famous no review of Metal Machine Music. He loved it, but he hated it.
Yeah.
You could review things a half year after they came out. It's not there. I mean, a record isn't just relevant the week that it hits.
No, you're serving the public. You're not serving the record company.
Right.
That should be the attitude.
I
have like a zillion more questions that I could ask. I have a list. We got through about 4 of them, which is great. They would like us to take a few questions from the people listening and watching. And Danny, can you help us out here?
Yeah, I will. By the way, before I start, we've got quite a few really good questions, and if you asked 4, then we're not going to get through them. But but that's okay. Let's start. This is from Alexander Shasko, who was one of the people who helped put this together. A lot of musicians, but it seems really on point with several things. A lot of musicians hung around the CREEM offices, especially when the magazine started. I wonder if you could all talk about the trade-offs when you know the artist that you're writing and reviewing, or when you don't know them. Any thoughts about that?
It was a big part of the documentary. Like Lester and I had this almost football chant before we'd go out to interview someone. We would go, remember, rock stars are not your friends. We really did keep a distance from people. They might show up, but that didn't guarantee anything. I know Ian Hunter, years later, I was doing his liner notes, and he was grousing about Lester, how Lester was his friend and he slept on our couch, and there my friend Lester like wrote a bad review. I think that's it's a perverse relationship. I don't think you can be friends with anybody you're writing about, because we want different things. Like, we wanted to tell the truth and they wanted a good review, and that's never going to work out. So there's also a part in the documentary where Cameron Crowe talks about Lester being friends with Fee Waybill from the Tubes. I think that wasn't true at all. You know, he may have gone to a party and taken their free dinners, but the thing was, we're really stringent about not really allowing that division to be penetrated. Maybe later, you know, because there's that famous picture of Lester at Coney Island with Debbie Harry, but then that's a whole different factor. I mean, he had a stupid crush on Debbie Harry, so you know that
he had a crush on every woman.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know. I see it differently. I think Lester was kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth on that. He would say, "Yeah, rock stars are not our friend," but every backstage I was ever in with Lester, the musicians inevitably, "Oh my God, Lester, come here, come here." They all loved him. I was at Rod Stewart and the Faces. Ronnie Wood invites us backstage. Ronnie Wood invites us to a party, you know. And I was there. I was there the morning that Ian Hunter was on the sofa, you know, sleeping over. Now, maybe, yeah, he would go ahead and trash an album of Ian's, but everybody loved to see him, and he loved being seen and being welcome. And
well, that part I understand. Like, but I think in the end, if he had the choice between writing an untruth to keep their friendship and writing the truth, he would always choose the truth. You know, I think that's it. So there's this illusion of friendship that we are all in it together, but we're all not really in it together.
Yeah, I have to say though, if you're friends with a rock star, your idea of what the truth is kind of warped by definition.
Yeah.
So I've never had any interest in being friends with.
No, me neither.
With me, you know, people are like, "Oh, you've met so many famous people over the years," and I think it's just like interviewing a human being. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I've never had any interest in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
it's like friends anyway. So
we would have casual friendships, though. I mean, I get postcards every week from John, Wade of the Babies, and things like that. And the people would call the office, and they'd recognize us at shows. And so I'm thinking of that in terms of deep friendships. Lester did a deep friendship with Ian, and he had Peter Loeffner and some musicians, and Rob Tyner of the MC5. He was very close.
So interesting that you mentioned John Waite, because one of my favorite things I've ever gotten was I gave a bad English album a B, not even a B+ in Entertainment Weekly. And he sent me a thank you note. And I swear it almost made me cry. He's thanking me for a B. That's so sad. And I mean, Babies make some good albums too. But yeah, he must be a super nice guy.
I always found that it was difficult. I mean, at Guitar World, it was like a little bit of a different relationship. And we would become friendly with the musicians. But I would have avoided it, because as soon as you also make a friendship, then the interviews all turn to shit, because they just want to bullshit about this, that, and the other thing. And you're like, no, I'm here on business now. You know, it was always very difficult to draw that line after you've developed a friendship.
Yeah, you only get one good crack at anybody anyway, seriously. Because they don't
Yeah.
know your tricks, you don't know theirs. And after that, there's that familiarity just kind of takes the edge off an interview. And I like edgy interviews. I mean, I think the more awkward, the better.
Although I think as a woman, though, you could ask things that were edgy and they'd forgive you, especially if they were guys, and especially if you're a young woman, and if you could get away with stuff, especially if it was the last few questions before you ran.
Yeah, last 5 minutes, always lethal for an artist.
Yeah, Danny, next.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, just what y'all said. I think it's very interesting to hear Pete Townsend last night talking about how, Dave could be unkind. He was like brutally honest about them at times, but in looking back over his life, he felt like that's one of the few people who really cared about me, and I think that's an interesting contradiction that's there. It's hard to know exactly where to go, but there's been some questions about new journalism, which you sort of touched on, but going back to this idea, CREEM was such a rock magazine. Do you think the music itself shaped how you wrote about the music? Does anyone want to speak to that?
I think he wanted to. Peter Grelnick talked about this in a lecture that I attended once, talking about you had to write up to your writing had to reflect the same spirit that the music was made in. The music was amazing. The music was prophetic. The music seemed to encompass more things than music does now, not just entertainment. So I think that the caliber of the music really did influence how we wrote about it. We actually wanted to respect the music, not just tear it down, although it might have sounded like we were tearing it down at times. But again, I think it was we were slaves to the truth. It was like you wanted to tell the truth about a record, if only so those teenage kids wouldn't spend their allowance dollars on a bad record. So I mean, that's my sense of it. Sue,
I'd love to see a study about CREEM covers. I mean, CREEM was not huge on mellow singer-songwriters in the 70s. And mellow singer-songwriters
James Taylor, Mark Trudell.
Like, I don't know. I mean, is there a Jim Croce cover or a John Denver cover or a Harry?
Yeah, there is a John Denver cover.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but I guess the thing is, you're aspiring to the energy of the music.
They
And
made
CREEM
John
was-
Denver into the baby Jesus, though, to be fair.
And see how exalted that was.
And we had Paul McCartney with the McDonald's thing over him. Right?
Yeah.
I remember that.
Well, I don't know. I think we thought of CREEM as being on an equal level to music. So it wasn't so much that rock influenced us as we wanted, like oftentimes you'd have a record review that was more entertaining than the record itself.
Absolutely.
That was the whole point of CREEM.
Good.
I think that's the whole idea of CREEM being America's only rock and roll magazine. The writing rocked.
Yeah.
And it just did. It just did. I mean, the CREEM writing rocked, and I can't think of the other, big rock magazines over time. I don't know. And obviously some of the same writers wrote for CREEM as wrote for Rolling Stone's review section. So there's some crossover, but as far as sense of humor, as far as just like the energy of the writing, and not just Lester, way beyond, it was just on another level, I think. I mean, there probably are fanzines. Maybe Phonograph Record Magazine or something small like that, might have been close. But
I'm always surprised at how the influence was so broad-based, because I Barry one time, the humorist, and he was a Rick Johnson fan. Who knew?
oh, yeah.
So it's surprising.
We've got a kind of a closer question that came in from Matt Orell. What do you think is the future of rock writing? There's been a few that pointed to this too, because of how much it's changing. So.
I will make the prediction that in as much as the rock writing has a future, it's not going to be about rock. I think that that's done. Maybe heavy metal's not done, but I mean, it's I would guess that, for the last 40 years, hip hop is what rock used to be, but I don't even know. I mean, I don't really keep up on what hip hop writing is now, and And I would also predict that whatever the future of rock writing is, it's not CREEM. It's not what CREEM was.
Hmm.
No, well, to some degree, you can get your music online for free. So it's not, there's less at stake in some ways, because you're not having to spend your, back in our day, $5 or whatever it was on an album, so you go up there and sort of listen to it and figure out whether you like it yourself, and then get a zillion different opinions on, Instagram or Facebook page or whatever, whether it's any good or what other people think. So that's put a dent, but I always think that there'll be some place for thoughtful analysis of music and pop culture. I like it. I like the AV Club, the thing that Onion does. I mean, to me, they're tough and they're funny, and I read it pretty religiously, and I will investigate things. You still need the problem with the internet, right, is that there's so much on it that you still need some people to help you figure out where to go. So I think, I don't know how, what format is the best, but I do believe, that there needs to be a place. And I would say, again, for my money, the AV Club probably comes the closest to having the spirit of the old CREEM, in that everything's up for.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I think there is a place for curated content. And I think it has to go back to, making the writers stars again, having the writing, having the content being as important to people as the music they might buy or might not. So you have to get back to that. And unfortunately, it's such a commodity now. And I hear about what people are paid for record reviews, and it's ridiculous. It's what we paid in the 70s, if that.
Even less than that.
Even less.
Like $25 is a high rate, so you can't make your money at it. So you have to do it.
It's hard for me to imagine somebody coming in like I did in the early 80s and making it a profession or whatever, I don't see how you can possibly do it.
And you have no product to sell too.
Right. And I mean, part of it is, with the internet, people started writing, thousands of people started reviewing records for free.
Yeah.
On their own blogs or whatever, or on YouTube, which I'm sure they monetize in some ways now. And I'm sure there are probably hilarious people writing about music somewhere. I wouldn't, maybe the AV Club is where to start. I don't know.
But here I come into the Dave influence. Writers have to start demanding respect and money. Don't write for free. Stop doing that. You undercut everybody that way.
The thing is, if you don't do it, somebody else is going to. And I don't get the idea whoever they is, cares about, one individual person being a holdout.
Collective action.
There are some entertaining video blogs out there where guys just talk about music and do so in a fun and interesting way. And Anthony Fontana is like a guy that's out there doing, saying interesting things, and, has enough of a following. I think he's making his money that way. So, there is a culture out there, I think.
Thank you all for this fantastic conversation. It's been lively. I've been just enjoying myself listening in, and as many other people have been doing. We need to toss it back to Eric now to tell us what's coming next. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Well, what a great conversation. And I'm glad we had so many viewers. We had about 115 people watching, and it'll be on YouTube soon to watch in the archives. Our next panel is one I am moderating in, I've lost track of time. I think it's in an hour, called On Listening with David Cantwell, Annie Zaleski, Steve Messick, and Alejandro Escovedo. So I hope to see folks back then. Thanks again, everyone.